You think you have power at 30,000 feet? You haven't met the man who owns the ground you land on. Flight attendant Stacy Corbett thought she was untouchable. She thought she was just enforcing the rules when she snatched a bottle of life-saving heart medication from a young girl's trembling hands and flushed it down the lavatory toilet. She laughed as the girl, Maya, begged for her life. But Stacy didn't check the manifest. She didn't know that the girl in seat 42A had a father who didn't just book flights, he grounded fleets. In exactly 5 minutes, Stacy's world is going to crash, and the karma is going to be lethal. Watch until the end to see the moment the engines cut out. The recycled air of the cabin always smelled the same, a mix of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and the nervous sweat of 300 people crammed into a metal tube. For Maya Sterling, a 21-year-old art student with a gentle demeanor and oversized headphones around her neck, it was usually a smell she could ignore. She loved flying. It was the only time the world went quiet. But today, Maya wasn't flying for fun. She was flying home to New York from a specialist clinic in London. The carry-on bag, tucked under the seat in front of her, didn't contain souvenirs or duty-free perfume. It held her life. Specifically, a small amber prescription bottle labeled digoxin, crucial for her arrhythmia. She was seated in 42A, the very back of the economy cabin on Sky Vista Flight 8822. Maya preferred to keep a low profile. Despite her father's immense wealth that could have easily bought her a seat in the private suites of first class, Maya insisted on flying economy. She hated the pretension of the elite circles. She wanted to be normal. She wanted to be invisible. Unfortunately, visibility wasn't a choice today. The flight attendant working the rear galley was a woman named Stacy Corbett. Stacy was in her late 40s, with hair dyed a brittle shade of blonde and a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. Stacy had been flying for 20 years, and somewhere along the line, she had stopped seeing passengers as people and started seeing them as cattle. Specifically, she had developed a sharp, unspoken bias against passengers who she deemed out of place. Maya, a young black woman, wearing a worn-out hoodie and sweatpants, sitting quietly with a book, apparently fit Stacy's profile of someone who could be bullied without consequence. The trouble began 30 minutes before takeoff. The fasten seatbelt sign was already on, but the plane was stuck on the tarmac at Heathrow due to a traffic delay. The air conditioning hadn't fully kicked in yet, and the cabin was stiflingly hot. Maya felt the familiar flutter in her chest. It wasn't anxiety. It was the arrhythmia. Her heart was skipping beats, struggling to maintain rhythm in the heat. She reached for her bag, her fingers trembling slightly. She needed a pill, and she needed water to swallow it. She pressed the call button. Ding. Nothing happened. She waited 2 minutes, her breath becoming shallow. She pressed it again. Ding. Stacy Corbett appeared in the aisle, not with a look of concern, but with a scowl that etched deep lines into her forehead. She was aggressively chewing gum. "We are preparing for departure," Stacy snapped, loud enough for the rows nearby to hear. "Sit down and keep your seatbelt fastened." "I'm sorry, Mom," Maya said, her voice soft and breathless. "It's really hot. I need some water, please. I have to take my medication." Stacy looked down at Maya, her eyes sweeping over the girl's messy bun and the inexpensive hoodie. She scoffed. "Beverage service isn't until we reach cruising altitude. That's at least 40 minutes away. You can wait." "I can't," Maya whispered, clutching the amber bottle. "Please, just a small cup. My heart." "Oh, for heaven's sake." Stacy rolled her eyes, turning to a passenger across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a suit, and shaking her head theatrically. Everyone has a condition these days when they want free service before takeoff. The man in the suit chuckled nervously, not wanting to get involved. Maya's hands were shaking harder now. She uncapped the bottle. "I don't need ice, just water. Please." Stacy leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Listen to me, sweetie. I am the lead attendant for this section. I say when we serve water. And right now, I say you sit down, shut up, and stop acting like a drama queen. Put the pills away. You're scaring the other passengers." "It's prescription," Maya pleaded, holding the bottle up. Stacy snatched the bottle. The movement was so fast, so aggressive, that Maya gasped. The passengers in row 43 went silent. "Hey!" A woman behind Maya spoke up. "Give that back to her." "Mind your business," Stacy barked at the woman. She looked at the bottle in her hand. Digoxin. She didn't know what it was, and she didn't care. To her, it looked like leverage. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for unmarked substances or passengers who exhibit erratic behavior. You're shaking, you're sweating, and you're demanding liquids. That looks like withdrawal to me." "It's heart medication," Maya cried out, tears welling in her eyes. "Check the label. My name is on it. Maya Sterling." "Sterling?" Stacy laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Yeah, right. Like the bank? Please. You look like you can barely afford this seat, let alone be related to anyone named Sterling. This is probably some street drug." Stacy turned on her heel and marched toward the rear galley. "No!" Maya unbuckled her seatbelt and scrambled up. "Please, I need that." "Sit down," Stacy shouted, pointing a manicured finger at Maya. "Or I will have you zip-tied for assaulting a crew member. Do not test me." Maya froze. Her chest was tightening. The thumping in her heart was erratic, terrifying. She sank back into seat 42A, gasping for air. "Please," she whimpered. "Just give it back." Stacy stood at the galley entrance, holding the bottle. She made eye contact with Maya. A cruel, satisfied smirk played on her lips. She unscrewed the cap. "Oops," Stacy said, deadpan. She turned the bottle upside down over the trash compactor. The tiny white pills, Maya's lifeline, rained down into the garbage chute, disappearing among half-eaten sandwiches and coffee grounds. "There," Stacy dusted her hands off. "Now the threat is neutralized. Sit down." The cabin was deadly silent. Maya didn't scream. She didn't rage. She went into shock. The realization of what had just happened washed over her cold and fast. Her medication was gone. They were about to take off on a 7-hour flight across the Atlantic. Without that dose, her heart rate would climb until it either gave out or she went into cardiac arrest. Stacy Corbett returned to her jump seat, looking smugly satisfied, chatting with a junior flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah who looked horrified, but was too afraid of her senior to speak up. "Did you really just throw those away?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "What if she actually needs them?" "Oh, grow up, Sarah." Stacy waved a hand dismissively. "They always say they need them. It's a power play. She just wanted me to fetch her water like a maid. You have to show them who's boss early, or they walk all over you. Besides, if she was really sick, she wouldn't be flying economy." In seat 42A, Maya was trying to control her breathing. In for 4, out for 4. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The signal was weak. The plane doors were closed, but they hadn't pushed back from the gate yet. She had 1 bar of 5G left. Her thumb hovered over her contacts. She didn't call the police. She didn't call the airline customer service. She opened a contact simply labeled Dad. She didn't want to worry him. David Sterling was a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was the CEO of Sterling Aviation Holdings, a private equity firm that specialized in aviation leasing. He didn't just own shares, he owned the actual metal. Half the planes in Sky Vista's fleet were leased from his company. He was currently in a meeting in Geneva, likely negotiating $1 billion merger. But she was scared. She was really, really scared. She typed a text message. "Dad, I'm on Sky Vista, 882. Flight attendant named Stacy C. just threw my heart meds in the trash. She refused me water. I'm scared. My chest hurts. We are about to take off." She hit send. The little circle spun. "Sending. Sending. Please," she prayed. "Please go through. Delivered." She slumped back against the seat, clutching her chest. 4,000 miles away, in a glass-walled conference room in Geneva, Switzerland, David Sterling was in the middle of a sentence. He was a tall man, imposing, with salt and pepper hair and a voice that commanded absolute silence. He was addressing the board of directors of a major European bank. His phone, which sat face up on the mahogany table, buzzed. David ignored it. He was a professional. It buzzed again and again. He frowned. Only 3 people had this direct number: his wife, his chief of staff, and his daughter, Maya. He glanced down. He read the preview of the message. The board of directors watched as the blood drained from David Sterling's face, replaced instantly by a look of terrifying, cold fury, the kind of fury that topples governments. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. "Mr. Sterling," the bank chairman asked, "is everything all right?" David didn't look at him. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. He didn't dial his wife. He dialed the personal cell phone of the CEO of Sky Vista Airways, a man named Richard Halloway, whom David played golf with twice a year. "Richard," David said. His voice was quiet, but it was the quiet of a calm before a tsunami. "David, we're in the middle of the—" Richard's voice came through, confused. "Shut up and listen," David cut him off. "My daughter is on your flight 882 out of Heathrow. A flight attendant named Stacy Corbett just destroyed her heart medication and denied her water. My daughter has a cardiac arrhythmia." There was a silence on the other end. "David, surely there's a misunderstanding." "If that plane takes off," David said, enunciating every syllable, "if those wheels leave the tarmac, I will invoke the immediate termination clause of your fleet lease. I will repo every single 777 you have. I will bankrupt you by morning. Do you understand me?" "David, wait. You have 2 minutes to stop that plane, Richard, or I'm coming for everything." David hung up. He looked at his chief of security, a massive man named Graves standing by the door. "Get the jet," David said. "We're going to London." Back on flight 882, the engines began to whine. The pilot, Captain Robert "Bob" Hayes, came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hayes. We've been cleared for pushback. Flight attendants, please prepare for cross-check. We'll be in the air shortly." Stacy Corbett smirked as she buckled herself into the jump seat, facing the rear passengers. She made direct eye contact with Maya, who was pale and sweating, eyes closed. "Gotcha," Stacy thought. Drama queen. The plane lurched backward. The tug was moving them. They were taxiing toward the runway. Maya felt the vibration of the engines. Her heart skipped a beat, then 2. A sharp pain radiated down her left arm. Panic set in. "I'm going to die here," she thought. "I'm going to die in economy because of a bottle of water." The plane turned onto the taxiway. They were next in line for takeoff. Suddenly, the plane jerked violently. It wasn't a mechanical failure. It was the brakes slamming on. The passengers gasped. Luggage shifted in the overhead bins. "What the hell?" Stacy muttered, unbuckling her belt. "Bob needs to learn how to drive." The engines, which had been spooling up for the pre-takeoff check, suddenly wound down. The whine died away into a low hum, then silence. The intercom crackled, but it wasn't the smooth, confident voice of Captain Hayes. It was a voice filled with confusion and genuine fear. Folks, this is the captain. We have just received an emergency order from air traffic control and company headquarters." Stacy frowned. "Headquarters? We have been ordered to hold our position immediately. We are being towed back to the gate. Security forces are meeting the aircraft." A murmur of worry rippled through the cabin. Terrorists? A bomb? Stacy stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Everyone remain seated," she barked, taking control. "It's probably just a security check. Nothing to worry about." She looked at Maya. "See?" she sneered. "Now you've got more time to sit there and think about your attitude." Maya didn't hear her. She was slumping sideways, consciousness fading at the edges. Outside the window, blue and red lights began to flash. Not just one police car, a dozen, and behind them, a black convoy of SUVs with diplomatic plates was tearing across the tarmac, ignoring all airport speed limits. The plane hadn't just been grounded, it had been captured. The silence inside the cabin of Flight 882 was fractured only by the nervous murmurs of 300 passengers and the rhythmic thumping of strobe lights from the emergency vehicles surrounding the plane. The heat, now that the engines were fully off, began to rise again, thick and suffocating. Stacy Corbett unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up in the rear galley, smoothing her uniform skirt with aggressive snaps of her wrists. She was annoyed. A delay meant she'd miss her connection in New York, which meant missing her dinner plans. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stacy announced, her voice tight with forced authority. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We have a minor operational issue that security is clearing up. We will be underway shortly." She glared at Sarah, the junior attendant, who was chewing her lip nervously. "Stop looking like a frightened rabbit, Sarah. It's probably baggage mismatch. Happens all the time." Stacy glanced at seat 42A. The girl, Maya, was slumped against the window, her eyes closed, her chest barely moving. Sweat matted her hair to her forehead. Commitment to the act, Stacy thought bitterly. I'll give her that. She considered offering water now, just to shut the girl up, but her pride wouldn't allow it. Giving in now would mean admitting she was wrong before. Stacy Corbett was never wrong. The plane shuddered as the jet bridge reconnected to the front fuselage with a heavy metallic clunk. Usually, the cabin door opening was a casual affair, a gate agent smiling, checking paperwork. Not today. The forward cabin door flew open with enough force to bang against the interior wall. Stacy craned her neck to see over the rows of seats. She expected TSA or maybe local airport police. Instead, 4 officers in the dark tactical uniforms of the London Metropolitan Police Specialist Firearms Command stormed aboard. They carried MP5 submachine guns slung across their chests. They didn't smile. They didn't speak to the flight crew. They moved with the terrifying precision of a metronome. Behind them came 2 men in sharp, expensive grey suits. They weren't police. They were something else, entirely. They moved like predators, scanning the cabin with eyes that missed nothing. A collective gasp ripped through first class as the armed officers marched past them without a glance. This wasn't a baggage issue. Captain Robert Hayes emerged from the cockpit, pale and sweating. He held his hands up in a placating gesture. "Officers, gentlemen, I'm Captain Hayes. Can someone tell me why my aircraft has been seized? I have 300 souls on board." One of the men in suits, the taller of the 2, with a buzz cut and a face carved from granite, didn't even break stride. He shoved a leather wallet toward the captain's face. It wasn't a police badge. It was a sleek, black ID card with a silver-embossed logo, a stylized falcon. Sterling Global Security. "My name is Graves," the man said, his voice a low rumble that carried further than a shout. "This aircraft is no longer under your command, Captain. It is a crime scene. Step aside." Captain Hayes, a man who had flown combat missions in the Gulf War, stepped aside like a scolded child. Stacy watched from the back, her annoyance curdling into genuine confusion. A crime scene? What is going on? Graves and the four armed officers began marching down the single economy aisle. They weren't looking at luggage bins. They were looking at faces. They were moving with singular purpose toward the rear of the plane. As they approached row 30, Stacy stepped out into the aisle, blocking their path. She put on her best, authoritative lead attendant face. "Excuse me," she snapped, holding up a hand. "You can't just barge through here with guns, scared the passengers. I am the lead flight attendant on this vessel, and I demand to know—" Graves didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He didn't even blink. He walked right up to Stacy until he was inches from her face. He was a foot taller than her, and wider than the beverage cart. The cold aura radiating off him was terrifying. Stacy involuntarily took a step back, her words dying in her throat. "Are you Stacy Corbett?" Graves asked. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Stacy stammered. Yes, I am. And you are violating FAA regulations by—" Graves ignored her. He looked past her, his eyes locking onto seat 42A. "Target acquired." Graves spoke into a small microphone on his lapel. "Secure the rear galley. Get the medics in here. Now." Two of the armed officers brushed past Stacy, physically moving her out of the way as if she were a piece of loose cargo. They took up positions on either side of row 42, effectively creating a steel wall around Maya. Stacy watched, horrified, as the other two officers opened the rear cabin door from the inside. A portable set of stairs had already been rolled up. Two paramedics in bright orange flight suits burst in, carrying heavy medical bags. "What is this?" Stacy shrieked, her controls snapping. "You can't bring unauthorized personnel back here. That passenger is fine. She's just acting out because I wouldn't give her free service." The paramedics ignored her, kneeling in the aisle beside Maya. One of them gently shook her shoulder. "Mom? Maya, can you hear me?" the paramedic asked urgently. Maya didn't respond. Her head lolled to the side. The paramedic placed 2 fingers on her neck. His eyes widened. "Thready pulse. Tachycardic. She's going into V-fib. Get the pads on her. Now." The quiet hum of the cabin was replaced by the chaotic symphony of emergency medicine. Velcro ripping, monitors beeping rapidly, urgent voices calling out medical jargon. They ripped open Maya's hoodie, attaching defibrillator pads to her chest. Stacy stood frozen against the galley wall. Her mouth was open. V-fib? Tachycardic. Those were real words. Scary words. She was just faking, Stacy whispered, but nobody was listening to her. The gravity of what was happening began to sink in, a cold lead weight in her stomach. Graves stood over the paramedics, his massive frame acting as a shield from the prying eyes of the other passengers. He watched as they worked to stabilize the young woman. "We need to push amiodarone," one paramedic yelled over the high-pitched whine of the defibrillator charging. "Prepare to shock on my count. Clear!" Thump. Maya's body jerked violently in the seat. "Still in V-fib. Charging again. Clear!" Thump. Stacy pressed her hands over her mouth. A whimpering sound escaped her throat. She watched as the flat line on the portable monitor suddenly jagged into a rhythm. A fast, chaotic rhythm. But a rhythm nonetheless. "We have capture," the paramedic breathed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "She's stable for transport. We need to get her to St. Thomas's immediately. Cardiac unit is on standby." They began to package Maya onto a portable stretcher, designed for narrow aisles. As they lifted her, Maya's eyes fluttered open weakly. They were glassy and unfocused. She saw Graves standing above her. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Graves leaned down, his hard face softening for a brief second. "He's coming, Miss Sterling. He's on his way. You're safe now." As the paramedics hurried Maya out the rear door and down the stairs to a waiting ambulance, Graves turned slowly. The cabin was dead silent. Every passenger was craning their neck, realizing they had just witnessed a near-death event. Graves's eyes found Stacy Corbett. She was pressed against the lavatory door, trying to make herself as small as possible. Graves walked toward her. The space in the rear galley suddenly felt incredibly small. "The paramedics," Graves said, his voice terrifyingly calm, said she was in ventricular fibrillation, brought on by extreme stress and a lack of prescribed digoxin. Stacy's breath caught. I didn't know. She just asked for water. We were on the ground. It's policy not to serve." "Policy." Graves repeated the word as if it tasted foul. He held out a large hand, palm up. "Where is it?" Stacy blinked rapidly. "Where is what?" "The medication," Graves said. "The bottle you took from her. Give it to me." Stacy looked around desperately, as if looking for an exit. The junior flight attendant, Sarah, was staring at Stacy with open disgust. The passengers in the back rows were glaring. I don't have it," Stacy whispered. "Did you log it as confiscated contraband?" Graves asked. "Did you give it to the captain? Where is it, Miss Corbett?" Stacy began to tremble. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. This wasn't a complaint form. This was armed police. This was a man in a suit who terrified her more than any hijacker could. I thought it was drugs," Stacy stammered, her voice rising in hysteria. She looked suspicious, unkempt. I threw it away." A gasp rippled through the surrounding rows. Even Captain Hayes, who had come back to see what was happening, looked horrified. Graves didn't yell. He didn't move. He just stared at her for 5 seconds that felt like 5 years. "You threw life-saving heart medication into the trash," Graves clarified, "because you didn't like the way she looked." "She was disrespectful." Stacy tried to rally, her old defensiveness kicking in. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. She was demanding. Be silent," Graves said. The command was absolute. Stacy's jaw clicked shut. Graves tapped his earpiece. "Status." A voice crackled in his ear. "The boss is 10 minutes out. He's landing on the private strip now." Graves looked at Stacy. A grim, humorless smile touched his lips. "You like rules, Miss Corbett. You like policy. You like wielding power over people who can't fight back." He took a pair of heavy-duty zip ties from his belt pouch. "Today, you're going to learn a new set of rules. You just attempted to kill Maya Sterling." Stacy's eyes bugged out. "Sterling? Like the—" "Yes," Graves said, stepping forward and grabbing Stacy's wrist with a grip like iron. "That's Sterling, the man who owns the lease on the plane you're standing in. The man who is currently landing at this airport with the sole intention of tearing your life apart." Stacy tried to pull away. "You can't do this. I'm a flight crew member. Captain Hayes, help me." Captain Hayes looked at the floor. "You're on your own, Stacy. God help you." Graves spun Stacy around and cinched the zip ties around her wrists tight enough to bite into the skin. "You wanted to be the boss of this metal tube," Graves whispered into her ear as he marched her toward the rear exit. "Now you're going to meet the landlord." Stacy began to sob as she was manhandled down the stairs onto the tarmac, the flashing blue lights of the police cars illuminating her tear-streaked face. But the police weren't taking her away yet. They were waiting. Everyone was waiting for David Sterling. The tarmac of Heathrow Airport is usually a place of organized chaos, fuel trucks, baggage carts, and marshals moving in a synchronized dance. But around the parked carcass of Sky Vista Flight 882, the world had stopped. A perimeter had been established. The passengers were still on board, faces pressed against the oval windows, watching the drama unfold below like a silent movie. Stacey Corbett stood near the landing gear of the massive Boeing 787. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back. She was flanked by two armed specialist firearms officers who looked at her with undisguised contempt. The cool London drizzle had started to fall, soaking her thin uniform blouse, making her shiver uncontrollably. "You can't do this," she mumbled for the 100th time, though the fight had largely drained out of her. "I have union rights. I want a representative." Your union representative is currently trying to figure out why your airline's stock price just dropped 12% in the last 20 minutes, Graves said. He was standing nearby, checking his watch. "I doubt they're picking up the phone for you right now." A low roar began to build in the distance. It wasn't a commercial jet, it was sharper, faster. A sleek, Gulfstream G700 private jet, painted matte black with no tail number visible, screamed out of the grey clouds. It touched down on the adjacent runway, thrust reversers roaring like angry dragons. It didn't taxi to the private terminal. It cut across the taxiways, ignoring ground control protocols that would have grounded any other pilot, and headed straight for Flight 8822. It screeched to a halt 50 yards away. The engines were still spooling down when the door opened. A black Range Rover, which had been idling near the perimeter fence, sped over to the jet. But the man who stepped out didn't wait for a ride. David Sterling descended the stairs. He was wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than Stacey's annual salary. He didn't have a coat. He walked through the rain as if he dared the drops to touch him. Behind him, scrambling out of a Sky Vista company car that had just arrived, was Richard Halloway, the CEO of the airline. Richard looked like a man marching to the gallows. He ran to catch up with David. "David! David! Please!" Richard panted, jogging alongside Sterling. "We can handle this internally. There's no need for a scene. We'll suspend her. We'll launch a full investigation." David Sterling stopped. He turned slowly to look at the CEO. The silence between them was louder than the jet engines. "Richard," David said, his voice terrifyingly conversational. "Do you know what ejection fraction is?" Richard blinked, wiping rain from his glasses. What?" "It's a measurement of how much blood the left ventricle pumps out with each contraction," David said, stepping closer. "My daughter's heart operates at 40% efficiency. Without her medication, under stress, that drops. If her heart stops, Richard, do you know what happens to your airline?" "David, come on. We've been friends for—" "I will bury you," David whispered. "I will strip this company for parts. I will sell your engines to cargo haulers in Siberia. I will turn your headquarters into a parking lot." He turned away from the CEO and looked at the group by the landing gear. He saw Stacey. Stacey saw him. She saw the eyes of a father who had almost lost his child, and the eyes of a billionaire who had never lost a fight. Her knees buckled. David walked up to her. He didn't yell. He stood 3 feet away, inspecting her like a structural crack in a fuselage. "Is this her?" David asked Graves. "Stacey Corbett," Graves confirmed. "Lead attendant. Admitted to throwing the medication in the trash because the victim looked like she couldn't afford the seat." David nodded slowly. He looked up at the plane, his plane, then back at Stacey. "You made a valuation error, Miss Corbett," David said softly. I didn't know," Stacey sobbed, shaking in the rain. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, I have a family. I have a mortgage." My daughter has a heart condition, David replied, his voice devoid of pity. She was alone. She was scared. She asked for water. And you decided to play God because you didn't like a hoodie. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen and held it up. It was a live video feed from the hospital. Maya was in a bed, hooked up to machines, sleeping. She looked pale, but the heart monitor was beeping steadily. She is alive, David said. That is the only reason you are not currently in a black site prison being interrogated for attempted murder. Stacy let out a breath of relief. Oh, thank God. So I can go? David laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. Go? David shook his head. Oh no, the police are done with you for the moment. But I'm just getting started. You see, Stacy, you destroyed my property. You endangered my asset, and you insulted my blood. He signaled to Graves. Bring me the tablet. Graves handed David a ruggedized tablet. David tapped the screen a few times. Stacy Corbett, David read aloud. Employed by Sky Vista for 22 years. Seniority level 4. Pension fully vested. 3 complaints in the last 5 years for rudeness, all dismissed by union arbitration. He looked at her. You felt safe, didn't you? Protected by the system. I do my job, Stacy said, a spark of her old defiance trying to ignite. I enforce safety regulations. You are a bully, David corrected. And bullies only understand one thing, a bigger bully. David tapped the screen again. As of 30 seconds ago, David said, Sky Vista Airways has received a default notice on the lease for this Boeing 777 300ER, tail number GVSTA. The lessor, my company, is exercising its right to ground the aircraft due to gross negligence in crew operations leading to passenger endangerment. Richard Halloway, the CEO, gasped. David, you can't. That's our flagship London route. That plane generates 40,000 a day. It's a paperweight now, Richard, David said, without looking at him. Unless, he looked at Stacy, unless the airline takes immediate remedial action to remove the liability. Richard Halloway didn't hesitate. He turned to Stacy. The friendship, the loyalty to his staff, the union fear. It all evaporated in the face of financial ruin. Stacy Corbett, Richard said, his voice shaking. You are effectively fired for cause, gross misconduct, willful endangerment of a passenger. You can't do that, Stacy shrieked. The union will sue you. I have rights. I'm not done, David interrupted. He looked at the tablet again. I also own a significant stake in the global insurer that underwrites flight crew liability bonds. You know, the insurance that allows you to work on an aircraft? Stacy stared at him. I just flagged you as a high-risk operator. Your bond is revoked, effective immediately. That means you cannot work for Sky Vista. You cannot work for British Airways. You cannot work for Delta. You cannot work for a crop duster in Idaho. David took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Stacy could hear. You will never fly again, Stacy. Not as crew. And given that I'm placing you on the global no-fly watch list for interfering with a flight crew, which, ironically, is the charge you threatened my daughter with, you won't even fly as a passenger. You are grounded. Permanently. Stacy felt the world spinning. My pension. Gone, David said. Consumed by the legal fees you are about to incur. Because my lawyers, and I have an army of them, are filing a civil suit against you personally for emotional distress and medical damages. We will take your house. We will take your car. We will take your savings. Stacy collapsed. The wet tarmac soaked through her knees. She wept, loud, ugly sobs that echoed off the metal belly of the plane she used to rule. "Why?" she wailed. "It was just pills! It was just water!" David Sterling leaned down, his face inches from hers. The rain dripped from his nose, but his eyes were burning with a fire that would never go out. "Because you forgot the most important rule of service," David hissed. "Every person in those seats is a human being. You treated my daughter like trash. So now I'm taking out the garbage." He straightened up and adjusted his cuffs. He looked at the police officers. "She's trespassing on a secure airfield," David said dismissively. "Get her out of my sight." The officers grabbed Stacy by the arms. She was dead weight now. They dragged her toward the police van, her heels scraping across the asphalt, her screams of, I'm sorry," fading into the drone of the airport. David turned to Richard Halloway. The CEO looked terrified. "David, about the lease." "The plane flies," David said, wiping the rain from his face. "But Richard." "Yes? If I ever hear of a passenger on your airline being denied water, or respect, or dignity, I won't just take the planes, I'll take the sky." David turned and walked back toward the Range Rover. Graves opened the door for him. "To the hospital, Graves," David said, sinking into the leather seat. "I need to see my girl." The VIP wing of St. Thomas's Hospital in London was a fortress of silence, a stark contrast to the chaotic tarmac of Heathrow. Here, the air smelled of antiseptic and expensive lilies. Security was tight. 2 of David Sterling's private contractors stood guard outside room 404, their presence a silent warning to the press vultures camping in the lobby downstairs. Inside the room, the only sound was the rhythmic beep hiss of a heart monitor. David Sterling sat in a leather armchair he had pulled right up to the bedside. He hadn't slept in 36 hours. His tie was undone, his expensive suit rumpled. He watched the rise and fall of his daughter's chest with the intensity of a man guarding a diamond mine. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a leading cardiologist, stepped into the room, checking a digital chart. She looked at David with sympathetic but serious eyes. "She's stabilizing, Mr. Sterling," Dr. Vance said softly. "The arrhythmia is under control. The amiodarone did its job, and the defibrillation was timely. But I need to be very clear with you about how close this was." David didn't look up from Maya's sleeping face. "Tell me." Her ejection fraction had dropped below 20% by the time the paramedics got to her, Dr. Vance explained, her voice grave. "If that plane had taxied for another 10 minutes, or if they had taken off and been over the Atlantic, she wouldn't be here." The lack of digoxin triggered a cascade failure. It wasn't just discomfort. It was a systemic collapse. David's hand tightened around the armrest of the chair until the leather creaked. So, it was attempted murder. "Medically speaking," Dr. Vance said, "it was a lethal deprivation of care. She is lucky to be alive." David stood up. The exhaustion vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He walked to the window, looking out at the grey London skyline. "Graves," he said, not turning around. The massive security chief stepped out of the shadows of the corner. "Sir, trigger the protocol," David said. "Scorched earth." The downfall of Stacy Corbett. Across the city, in a holding cell at a West London police station, Stacy Corbett was sitting on a hard wooden bench. The fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly, drilling a headache into her skull. She was cold. They had taken her shoes, her belt, and her phone. She was still in her Sky Vista uniform, but it was stained with rain and sweat. The lead attendant wing pinned to her chest felt like a joke now. The heavy steel door clanked open. Stacy looked up, expecting a lawyer. She had demanded a union rep hours ago. Instead, a detective walked in. Detective Inspector Miller, He looked tired and unimpressed. He carried a plastic cup of lukewarm water and a thick file. "Water," he said, setting the cup down. "Ironically, you're entitled to it." Stacy flinched at the jab. "I want my lawyer. The union provides legal counsel for workplace disputes." Miller sat down, opening the file. "Ms. Corbett, I just got off the phone with the flight attendants union. They have declined to represent you." Stacy's mouth fell open. "What? They can't do that. I pay my dues." "There is a clause in your membership regarding gross criminal negligence and bringing the profession into disrepute," Miller read from a paper. "Given that the incident was recorded by 3 separate passengers, and the victim is the daughter of a man who practically owns the aviation industry, the union decided you were, and I quote, a liability they cannot afford. You are on your own." Stacy felt the blood drain from her face. "But it was a mistake. I didn't know who she was." "That's the problem, Stacy," Miller said, leaning forward. "If she had been a nobody, you still would have let her die. That's what the jury is going to hear. But right now, the criminal charges are the least of your worries." Miller slid a stack of documents across the table. They weren't police forms. They were on heavy, cream-colored bond paper, with the letterhead, Sterling, Kravitz, and Moore. "These were just delivered to the front desk for you," Miller said. "It's a civil summons." Stacy picked up the papers with trembling hands. She tried to read the legalese, but certain phrases jumped out at her like physical blows. Plaintiff, Maya Sterling. Defendant, Stacy Corbett. Cause of action, intentional infliction of emotional distress, battery, endangerment. Damages sought, $5,000. $5 million? Stacy whispered. "I don't have £5 million. I rent a flat in Hounslow." "Keep reading," Miller suggested dryly. Stacy turned the page. Injunction order. Immediate freezing of all assets held by the defendant to prevent flight risk or dissipation of funds. "They froze my accounts?" Stacy shrieked, standing up. "My savings? My checking? How am I supposed to eat? How am I supposed to pay rent?" "I don't know," Miller said, standing up and gathering his file. "But you made bail. A bondsman posted it. Anonymous donor. Likely so Mr. Sterling could watch you squirm in the real world rather than sit in here. You're free to go, Miss Corbett. But I'd suggest you don't check your social media." Stacy stumbled out of the police station an hour later into a blinding flash of cameras. She hadn't expected press. She expected maybe a local reporter. What she got was a mob. Stacy, did you know she was dying?" "Stacy, look this way. How does it feel to be the angel of death?" "Ms. Corbett, do you have a comment on the boycott Sky Vista movement?" She shielded her eyes, pushing through the crowd. She looked for a taxi, but as soon as a cabbie saw her face, he locked his doors and drove off. The story was everywhere. Her face, the face of the woman who flushed heart pills down a toilet, was on the cover of the Evening Standard at the newsstand right next to her. She had to walk. She walked 3 miles in the rain to the tube station, enduring glares from strangers who recognized her uniform. When she finally got to her apartment building, her key didn't work. She tried it again, jiggling it. Nothing. The door opened from the inside. Her landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, who had always been kind to her, stood there. He wasn't smiling. "Mr. Henderson," Stacy breathed, shivering. "The lock is stuck. I need to get in." "You don't live here anymore, Stacy," Mr. Henderson said, blocking the doorway. "What? You can't evict me without notice?" "I can when the police raid the apartment looking for evidence of narcotics trafficking, because you claimed the girl had drugs," Mr. Henderson said, his voice shaking with anger. They tore my place apart an hour ago, and I have reporters banging on my windows, scaring my wife. Here are your bags." He kicked 2 suitcases onto the wet doormat. "My things, my furniture. Put in storage. I'll send you the bill. Don't come back." He slammed the door. Stacy stood in the hallway, dripping wet. 2 suitcases beside her, her bank accounts frozen, her career incinerated. She pulled out her phone to call her mother. No service. Her service provider had cut her off. The credit card linked to the autopay had been declined due to the freeze order. Stacy Corbett slid down the wall until she hit the floor. She buried her face in her hands and screamed. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated regret. She realized, in the cold hallway, that David Sterling hadn't just sued her. He had erased her. The Boardroom Massacre. While Stacy was learning the meaning of rock bottom, David Sterling was conducting business. He wasn't at the hospital anymore. He was in the penthouse boardroom of the Shard, overlooking the city. Seated around the long glass table were the top executives of SkyVista Airways, including CEO Richard Halloway. The atmosphere was not tense. It was funereal. David stood at the head of the table. He didn't have any notes. He didn't need them. "Gentlemen," David began, his voice quiet, "I have reviewed your company's training manuals. Section 4, paragraph 2 states that crew discretion is paramount in maintaining cabin order. That is the clause Ms. Corbett used to justify torturing my daughter." "David," Richard Halloway said, sweating profusely, "we are rewriting the manual. We are firing the head of training. We are offering a settlement to Maya of $10 million. We want to make this right." David looked at the check Richard had slid across the table. He picked it up. He looked at it for a moment, then slowly tore it into 4 pieces. "You think this is about money?" David asked. "I spent $10 million on catering, Richard. This isn't a negotiation. This is a dictation of terms." David pressed a button on the intercom. "Send them in." The doors opened. A team of 20 lawyers in shark grey suits walked in, placing stacks of binders in front of each SkyVista executive. "What is this?" the COO asked, terrified. "That," David said, "is a hostile takeover bid. As of this morning, Sterling Global has acquired 41% of SkyVista's outstanding shares. I bought the dip you caused. I am now your largest shareholder." The room erupted in gasps. "You can't do that!" Richard stood up. "The regulatory board works for people like me." David finished the sentence. "I own you, Richard. I own the planes. I own the routes. And I own your jobs." David walked around the table, stopping behind Richard's chair. "Here is what is going to happen. Effective immediately, SkyVista is implementing the Maya standard. It is a zero-tolerance policy for medical neglect. Every flight will carry a specialized cardiac kit. Every crew member will undergo empathy training certified by St. Thomas's Hospital." "Done," Richard said quickly. "We'll do it." "Also," David continued, "you, Richard, are resigning. Tonight, citing personal health reasons." "David, please," Richard begged. "I didn't throw the pills." "No," David said, leaning down to whisper in his ear. "But you built the culture that allowed her to think she could get away with it. You hired the bully. You protected the bully. Now you fall with the bully." David straightened up and buttoned his jacket. "Get out of my chair," he said. Richard Halloway, a man who had run an airline for a decade, stood up, packed his briefcase, and walked out of the room, a ghost of his former self. David sat down at the head of the table. He looked at the remaining executives. "Now," he said, "let's talk about the flight home." The ascent 2 days later, Maya was discharged. She didn't leave through the front entrance. Graves and his team escorted her out a side exit to a waiting convoy of black SUVs. She was wearing comfortable clothes, new ones her dad had bought, and she looked stronger. "Ready?" David asked, opening the car door for her. "Yeah," Maya said. She paused, looking at the newspaper on the seat. Former flight attendant, homeless after legal battle. The article described how Stacey Corbett had been denied public housing due to the active criminal investigation. She was currently sleeping in a shelter. The internet had shown no mercy. Memes of her flushing the pills were circulating globally. She had become the face of cruelty. "Dad," Maya said, pointing at the paper. Is this too much?" David looked at the photo of Stacey, huddled in a coat, looking miserable. "She nearly killed you, Maya," David said. "She made a choice. She chose to be cruel when she could have been kind. She chose to be arrogant when she could have been humble. The world is just balancing the scales." "I know," Maya said, "but I don't want to be like her. I don't want to be cruel." David smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "That is why you are extraordinary, sweetheart. You have a heart condition, but you have the strongest heart of anyone I know." He tapped the driver's shoulder. "To the airport." They didn't go to the commercial terminal. They drove straight to the private hangar. Waiting on the tarmac was the Gulfstream G700. But next to it was something else. A massive cargo plane was being loaded with pallets of medical supplies. "What's that?" Maya asked. "That," David said, "is the first shipment of the Maya Sterling Foundation. I'm taking the money I stripped from Stacey and the settlement from the airline, and I'm funding cardiac research and supplying free heart medication to clinics in developing nations. We're going to turn her cruelty into 1 million lives saved." Maya felt a lump in her throat. She hugged her father, burying her face in his shoulder. "Thank you, Dad." "Don't thank me," David whispered, holding her tight. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything. Keep your pills in your pocket next time," he joked gently. They walked up the stairs of the jet. Inside, the cabin was paradise. Soft beige leather, fresh fruit, and a dedicated medical officer sitting in the jump seat, just in case. As the jet taxied out, Maya looked out the window. She saw a Sky Vista plane taking off in the distance. She knew that inside that plane, the crew was different today. They were attentive. They were careful. They were watching out for the quiet girl in 42A. The Gulfstream roared down the runway. The G-force pushed Maya back into her seat, but this time her heart didn't flutter in panic. It beat strong and steady. They climbed past the clouds, breaking through the grey English rain into the dazzling, blinding sunlight of the upper atmosphere. David reached across the aisle and held her hand. "How's the view?" he asked. Maya looked down at the world below, a world that was a little bit harsher for the cruel and a little bit safer for the kind. "It's beautiful," she said. The jet banked west, chasing the sun toward New York. The nightmare was over. The ground was far below, but for the first time, Maya Sterling felt like she was truly flying. Stacey Corbett learned the hard way that when you try to crush the weak, you might just wake up the strong. She lost her home, her career, and her future, all because she refused to show a single ounce of humanity. But from the ashes of her cruelty, a new standard was born, saving countless lives. It's a powerful lesson. You never know who you're talking to, and you never know whose father might own the plane. What do you think? Did Stacey deserve to lose everything? Or was David's revenge too harsh? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a debate going. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. Share this video with your friends to remind them that karma is always watching. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We have an even crazier story coming up next week about a hotel manager who evicted the wrong grandmother. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.